Hi everyone, and welcome back to Shameless Careers. Today we're talking about an issue that so many high achievers struggle with: people pleasing. On the surface, saying yes, making everyone happy, and avoiding conflict looks like a smart career strategy. After all, it's people who are making decisions about your pay and promotions, so why wouldn't you please them? But what's the hidden cost if you don't address that? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Yelena Radonich, an award-winning career and leadership coach, Forbes Coaches Council member, and trusted advisor to leaders from Amazon, HSBC, Goldman Sachs, Bain, PwC, and many more. So, Yelena, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Maria. Lovely to be here.
Let's start with the definition of people-pleasing. How would you define this, and is people-pleasing always unhealthy?
So, people-pleasing is one of the tendencies that I tend to categorize under saboteurs or limiting beliefs that make us behave sometimes in ways that are counterproductive. Generally, how to understand saboteurs, the best way would be to see if there is alignment or not between our original intention and the outcome. So, to tie this back to you, your original question, you may be saying yes, being amiable, people-pleasing to a certain extent, and if it's all feeling okay, authentic and aligned with you, and you get a good result, great. I wouldn't call that people-pleasing as a saboteur, okay? However, if there is a cost associated to it, in other words, if there is a discrepancy or incongruence between your intention and the outcome, then we look at saboteur running the show. In other words, you're overwhelmed, you have a lot of work on, the boss comes in, or a peer or a colleague, whoever, and then you take on more. But everything inside is screaming, saying, no, I don't want to do this, I can't do it. Why am I doing this to myself, for example? And you take it on. And then you struggle, you feel resentment, you may be even angry or frustrated with those people, whereas essentially you're angry with yourself. Why? Because you did something that really didn't align with your original intention or feeling.
Just to summarize, basically, if people-pleasing brings you closer to your goals, for example, you get paid, promoted, everyone loves you, this is not an issue, right? But if you see that it's counterproductive to the outcome that you want to achieve, this is where we're saying that this is a saboteur that needs to be tackled, right?
Yes, absolutely. And in the context of this podcast and our conversation, I just want to emphasize how important it is to have the right mindset in order to be successful in your career. So the surface things like your CV, your LinkedIn, interview prep, all of that is great. But if you're not mastering the things that are running your life, in other words, you, but those hidden mechanisms of you, then likelihood is you will not be successful, or it will come at a greater cost to you. So how do saboteurs actually, or these limiting beliefs and patterns of behavior, come into being? It's a process of our development as we grow up, literally from baby to an infant, from infant to a child and a young adult. As our psyche is shaped by external influences, we adopt a lot of the values and behaviors of our parents and carers and so forth. So we develop protective mechanisms, right, that will protect us from the external world. Some of it could be people-pleasing or controlling or even hyper-achieving, which I will touch upon later, in order to respond better to the environment as we grow, and then we're further influenced by peer culture and teachers and so on. However, as we develop fully, these patterns of thought and behavior stop serving us because there's no need for protection anymore. We are grown up, ideally mature beings, and we can make conscious decisions. But because these have been sort of engraved or grooved into our psyche and our brain, literally, neuroscientifically, these are grooves where information travels so many times that becomes our default position. And that's how we react unconsciously or subconsciously. When something is perceived potentially as a threat or discomfort, that's how we react. But we're mostly not aware of it. This has now gone into our subconscious. Okay. And as Carl Jung says, what we are not conscious of governs us. Only when we start to develop awareness of these mechanisms, we're able to start to deal with them, perhaps control them, or a better word would be to manage them, so that we then create from alignment with our original intention and desire, rather than to satisfy, a particular need or way of thinking that is now outdated. So when it comes to people pleasing, for example, the original, as the framework calls it, survival function is, I need to be accepted and loved and liked. So I need to do something to deserve that. So the core belief is, I'm not lovable or likable and I'm not worthy. I know this sounds super heavy and a lot of people are like, what is this about? But essentially it's really a core belief that is not as easy to see, that makes us behave like that over a lifetime or later on when we don't need to necessarily act so that we can please others, so that they can appreciate us, love us, and so forth. What can happen with this particular pattern is that we start to overgive. We start to help and support too much. We start to rescue. Like one of the persona types that is tied to people pleasers is rescuer. So the positive side of someone who is a people pleaser is that they're usually highly emotionally intelligent and empathic. So they tune into the needs of others, because you need to understand what the other person wants and needs so you can give it to them to please them, right? And then you get this like accolade or appreciation. So the positive side is that you are tuned into the needs of others. You can build great relationships and great rapport and so forth. But there's always a line between, being amiable, proactive, driven, and people-pleasing. So in other words, if you are, say you volunteer at work for something, or, you volunteer for projects, you do great stuff, you raise your visibility, all of that is great. But if you start to do that and it costs you because you just cannot take on so much work, you're already full, you're at capacity, you've been working all God's hours forever and ever, what that leads to is burnout. That's one of the big causes of burnout, is actually people-pleasing, the inability to say no, both from the point of view of being very empathic, seeing the needs of others, taking them on, with the underlying desire to please others, because that gives the signal to my brain, okay, I'll be okay like this, I'll be safe because they will like me, they will accept me.
Yeah. Could you please give me maybe a couple of examples of how people-pleasing did bear a high cost for someone?
What comes to mind is a recent client, and it's an interesting story in the sense that she is very driven but has really strong people-pleasing tendencies. So she's the type of person, and, she takes on a lot of work. She was leading this high-profile project. What helps is that she's an incredibly smart woman, so she could process things quickly and get things done and so forth. But she literally had too much on. And this was a big project that was going on for months and months. And about 2-3 weeks before the launch of that product that she was single-handedly driving pretty much, with no direct reports, but some support laterally, they landed more work on her in terms of some regulatory reports that were very tedious and, extremely labor-intensive. So she had to do that as well. So she didn't say, no, I can't do it, or ask for help. She took everything on. So what she did, but she kept doing it anyway, is something that a lot of us have done, which is you come home from work, you're already tired and exhausted, you have a couple of hours break, and then you log in and you work until 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and, and it's happening all the time. Anyhow, the product launched successfully. They had a massive event. She was praised for her work and a few other key people. They even had a big celebration and so forth. That was all wonderful. She also managed to finish these reports. Come Monday morning, this is happening all on a Friday, this is all finished and done. Instead of seeing a positive email feedback or, discussions that will lead to her promotion, she finds an email saying, you've been made redundant.
Oh no. Oh my God, how did that happen?
It's a true story. And not just herself, but a few other people as part of reorg. Now, the thing is, the senior management must have known They've had this plan for 5-6 months, but they literally wanted people to do their best over and above and beyond to deliver this. So you can imagine the shock, the disappointment, and So basically, she couldn't have influenced this outcome, even if she wasn't as people-pleasing and as taking as much. But had she had more boundaries, set some time, like hours for herself to recoup, to recharge, perhaps outsource bits of work for these reports and stuff that were given on top, at least it would have been of a lesser cost to her. In such a situation, and I've been in similar situations, not being made redundant, but really I kill myself delivering, and, clients are singing me praises and they're like calling the CEO to say how all great it was. And then, you feel like a fool because you don't get anything in return, and someone else gets a promotion or a massive bonus and you get a pat on the back. So these are some of the scenarios that I see with people happening, which also leads to it's a slightly tangential conversation, but I just mention it because it's important, which is only hard work, even, volunteering, taking a lot on, and even delivering brilliantly is not enough. You need to be in the right mindset, set the boundaries, and also be able to present your work, to broadcast, to accompany this by a strong personal brand and ideally some executive presence where people are going to take notice of this. So if you do that, and if you learn to set boundaries, then you kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because people are going to start to really see what you are delivering and appreciate you for it. And by setting boundaries and saying no where necessary, they will appreciate you more, and you will also create a healthier lifestyle for yourself.
Can you tell me more about this dynamic? That's so interesting, because I did hear it from someone that you may naturally fall into a trap of thinking the more you please, the more people see it and value it.
No.
But sometimes the paradox is when people say, oh, it's the moment I've set boundaries and started doing that proactively, I started seeing that people value me more. So how does that work from the other side? Why does the assessor value it more when you are quite firm with your boundaries?
It is almost like a paradox, but it's in the human nature. It's in the human nature to want what is not given. And this goes for personal relationships and professional relationships to a certain extent. Again, it's a fine line, But if you're able to draw a line and say no, or this doesn't work for me, or this doesn't work for me right now, or no, I just don't have the capacity, sorry in brackets, but not necessarily even sorry, because why do you say sorry? If you have no capacity, you have no capacity, right? There's one thing about being dependable and reliable, and another thing is being a doormat. And there's a line, a boundary at which you say no. And then people, because that's perhaps a new action on your behalf, it will trigger a new reaction on their part, and they will think, oh, something's different. Okay, next time before I go to her or him, let me think, maybe I can do this by myself, or maybe I can give it to John or whoever. And, one of my spiritual teachers, and I've had quite a few, told me many years ago, and that was a big eye-opener for me, is people treat you the way you educate them to treat you. So, it's up to us how we want to be treated. That's why I say, again, one of the big realizations in a situation similar to that was with myself, was if I was angry or frustrated, and then I realized I can't really be angry with the other person. I can only be angry with myself because I allowed this to happen. I allowed it to happen. I facilitated it because, I was overgiving, I was always there, I was delivering, I was over-delivering, and, you can't blame others for that. And unfortunately, there will be people, both again in personal and professional life, who will latch onto that because certain types of psychological makeups attract other types of psychological makeup who are going to use that or even abuse, unfortunately. So my word of caution is, if you have people-pleasing tendencies, really look into it and find ways to bring them into your awareness and then start to curb them, because that's the only way to shift things.
Once you caught yourself that you are pleasing people, what type of mindset should you have to then be able to take some action afterwards?
Sure. So first and foremost is building the self-awareness. So self-awareness can be developed through a variety of tools, whether it is mindfulness, meditation, self-reflection, and even just being able to set the intention that you're not going to have this kind of default reaction. I can share something very personal. At one point, this was at the time when I was training to be a coach in 2015-16, I created a coaster and for coffee and a key ring on which I wrote, "Let me think about it," so I can always see this, to remind myself that I don't have to say yes or no at all in the first instance.
So interesting. You can simply not emotionally react, whereby there will be a risk of falling into people-pleasing, but you can pause and then you can think about it rationally, if it serves you or not.
Exactly. So my advice is create something, a reminder. Could be something on your phone, could be a post-it note, could be something. Some people have a bracelet that, you can touch, or like physicality of it is quite important so that you remember, you just don't go into unconscious and do the usual thing. Okay. So once you are able to start to do that, then it's about breathing, taking a pause and breathing, and then really feeling into yourself. Now, this is a bit of like somatic work that sometimes needs to be done, where you need to tune into your body and see how it feels. In the corporate world, that's almost impossible. People are like this, it's all analytical, rational thinking, decisions, and that's it. But what I always say is the most overlooked question is, how does this feel? What does this feel like? And your body is going to give you a response. If you start, I don't know what your tension points are, could be neck and shoulders or your stomach, or, if you see the tension, it'll be fairly easy to ascertain that that's not right for you. That's not the course of action.
So you have taken a pause when a request like this has come in, and then what phrase or mantra, I don't know, you can say, or a sentence you can say to yourself to start prioritizing, I guess, your boundaries more versus pleasing others?
There was a particular sentence or question, actually. As a coach, I ask a lot of probing questions and powerful questions. And this came to me in a session with a client a while ago who had very strong people-pleasing tendencies. It was very clear it was from the upbringing, strong parents, strict parents that expect this, that, and the other. And I just asked him, who are you making happy with this decision? And he literally, his jaw dropped because he never thought about that. And then he was silent for a few minutes. And then he said, my mother, my parents. But that's not what I want to do. Another question, which I use sometimes to open my live talks when I deliver them in person, is, who is the most important person in your life? And a lot of people laughed when I asked them that. That's how I opened one talk a few years ago. And some said, my child or whatever. No, it's actually you. It is you. Because you're the only person who's going to be with yourself until the rest of your life.
And bear the consequences of decisions that you take or don't take.
Absolutely. And also one other aside thought is, as they say, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So it's great to be supportive of others, to say yes, to do things. But if you really deplete yourself by forgetting about your own needs because you prioritize everyone else or you make other people happy all the time, then your cup is going to run very low. And then you won't be able to help anyone anyway, nor even yourself.
All right. So first of all,
yes,
you need to take a pause. If you feel like you're falling into people-pleasing tendency, you need to take time to think about it. Then you need to remember two questions. Who are you making happy with this decision?
Perfect.
And who is the most important person in your life? And what happens afterwards? I guess it's still difficult to do it, but then kind of how should you frame your boundaries so that on the one hand, you set it up, but on the flip side, you're not seen as difficult, you don't ruin the relationship.
Yes.
How should one proceed with this?
It is about really being, grounded, authentic, happy with your choice, calm, and also be prepared that there will be a pushback. And then, as a people pleaser, remember you're very good in communicating and with communication and emotional intelligence. So then remember how you can structure the conversation. For example, saying, I understand where you're coming from. So, right, you're showing empathy. You know, as my boss or as my mother or whoever, I can see your viewpoint and I know you're concerned because of X, Y, Z. And I appreciate that. I appreciate your care or whatever, yeah? And then you can go into just stating without too much explanation and justification is that, you know, I thought about this and this is what I decided and this is the best thing for me.
And why not justifying yourself too much? Because I can imagine that the people-pleasing tendency would be to say, oh, look, this, that, the other, that's why I can't take it. Yeah, exactly. So what is that about? Why shouldn't we do it?
Because you kind of undermine yourself. I actually teach my clients this as well in the work context, because if you justifying, explaining, over-explaining, it almost gives the subconscious signal to the other person or people that you are not sure yourself, and therefore you need to explain so much and persuade them.
And let's zoom into another example that probably people pleasers also, I would imagine, struggle with is giving hard feedback. How do you deliver a hard message whilst being an empathetic person?
If you're an experienced empathetic leader, you will approach it in the right way, in the sense that you will make the person safe, first of all. They need to feel safe. In other words, not attacked. The rule is, and again, this is quite well known, is that ideally you want to first open with something positive. And then you need to, because pretty much everyone does something well, right? It's not like it's all doom and gloom. So show them that you are on their side, you appreciate what they have done well. However, these things are not going well. And then you have to tell them specifically not only what is not going well, but also what you want to see improved. And then get them to ask more questions, like clarifying questions, so you can help them with some strategies on what to do and how to improve. Not necessarily giving them a recipe, because they need to develop, right? They need to grow. They need to figure out things. But you don't want to leave them in the dark either. I can't tell you, Varya, how many clients I have who come to me and are so frustrated by the feedback they get from their boss or boss's boss, which is negative feedback, but very non-specific. They never tell them what quite is not working. Like, you're great at this, but these 2 or 3 or 5 things, or these particular skills, or whatever it is, or how you speak in meetings, or how you run your team, I'm not happy with. Okay, so what is it about how I run my team that you're not happy with? You know, you really need to be granular and specific. Another saying is, it's terrific to be specific. And it's really in any communication, because then the person can feel empowered to do something about it and to improve. Whereas non-specific negative feedback is a killer of motivation. That's what leads people to quiet quitting or quitting.
And someone mentioned a nice phrase saying the feedback should be clear and kind. So it can still be focused on areas of improvement, but as long as you're kind to the person, that's maybe how to bridge the two, right?
Absolutely. But again, just another angle on being an empathetic, possibly with people-pleasing tendencies leader. So people with people-pleasing tendencies will tend to use either affiliative style or coaching style or democratic style, or vary between these. Affiliative leadership style is when you really build deep connections with people. You affiliate. You understand them. You invite them to your barbecue. You go to their kid's birthday. You know, it's like really, you become almost like friends at work. And that is great, as long as you can also maintain professional relationship and boundaries and so forth.
Which comes back to the result that you've mentioned earlier, right? Because as a leader, you also want to deliver the results. Your team should hopefully collaborate with us.
Exactly. So as a leader, if you have these traits and you use mostly affiliative style or coaching style, where you kind of coach your team, which is great because you want them to grow and develop, but you also cannot give all your time to this because you also need to manage upwards, you need to do your work and so forth. And then democratic style is about building consensus, which is very much about kind of peacemaking, right? You want everyone to agree and then you bring the decision on. In some situations, that's great. But if something is urgent or there's a crisis, you can't go for consensus. And I've seen people fail, leaders, and their organizations fail because they were not able to, bang the fist on the table and say, no, now we can't do this. We have to, decide now, and this is the course of action, and really show strong leadership. So if you have, people-pleasing tendencies as a leader, probably your team will love you, very likely, because you give them time, attention, encouragement, everything. You will probably have very good relationships with your peers, clients, maybe even with your bosses, but really beware that you don't slide into, complacency by thinking, oh, it's all nice and soft and lovely. Sometimes you have to, put a foot down and not get a consensus and actually deal with an uncomfortable conversation or even confrontation.
Could you give one tip to someone who is in this situation but needs to go out of their nature in a particular crisis moment and say, okay, guys, now no consensus, we're doing this, and half of you are pissed off, fine. What should this person tell to themselves?
Right. Again, it's important to understand that we are not just one type of personality, and not to label ourselves or even others or kind of box ourselves in, I'm a people pleaser and I'll always be that. No, our capacity is much bigger and we can stretch. And actually, as they say, rightly so, the growth happens when we feel uncomfortable. Why are we feeling uncomfortable? Because we're doing something different, which is not what we normally do. And the discomfort can be intense, but that's when we grow. That's when we show we have a capacity to be this and that. It doesn't have to be in opposition, like two different personalities. It's about expanding the register of our personality, and if you're a leader, of your leadership styles. So that depending on the situation, you can be soft and warm and empathetic, but also very decisive and bold and firm when the need is there.
Elena, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.